And we do have this statement as we stay in the Middle East from the U.S. State Department. They are talking about this Iranian state threat. They say, quote, "We are united in our opposition to the attempts of Iranian intelligence services to kill, kidnap, and harass people in Europe and North America in clear violation of our sovereignty. These services are increasingly collaborating with international criminal organizations to target journalists, dissidents, Jewish citizens, and current and former officials in Europe and North America. This is unacceptable. We consider these types of attacks, regardless of the target, as violations of our sovereignty. We are committed to working together to prevent these actions from happening, and we call on the Iranian authorities to immediately put an end to such illegal activities in our respective territories," end quote. And that is, of course, a quote, as I mentioned, from the U.S. State Department. We do also have this post from the Bureau of Counterterrorism as they say, "We are united in our opposition to the attempts of Iranian intelligence services to kill, kidnap, and harass people in Europe and North America in clear violation of our sovereignty. We know that the U.S. and 13 of their allies, including the UK and Canada, coming together to condemn what they call a surge in assassination, kidnapping, and harassment plots by Iranian intelligence services that are targeting people in North America and Europe." A lot to discuss there out of the Middle East, so I do want to bring in David Dowd, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. David, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Pleasure to be on, Josh.
And first, I do want to talk to you about the statement that I was just reading there from the U.S. and 13 allies there, including Canada, the U.K., and a lot of other allies. What is the significance of that statement, and what are they really saying?
Well, the significance of it is that we're finally recognizing what the Iranian regime has done since its rise to power in the late 1970s and 1979. There were spates of assassination campaigns, not just in the Middle East, not just in Iran, but of dissidents, opposition figures, people that had fallen out of favor with the regime in France in the 1980s at the hands of Iranian agents, including through people that would become affiliated with what would later turn into Hezbollah. So this isn't anything new for the Iranian regime. This has continued throughout its history up until the present, and we're finally acknowledging it. We're finally acknowledging that the issue, and when I say we, I mean the collective West is finally acknowledging it. The issue coming out of Iran is not just nuclear weapons, and the problems with Iran are not just confined to the Middle East. They are targeting people, be they Iranian citizens on our soil, or our own citizens or any other citizens. They're targeting people on our soil, and this is reaching our part of the world. This isn't just confined to the Middle East. This isn't just a problem. If we turn a blind eye to it, like some of us would like to do, then it'll just go away.
As far as the Iranian government, have we heard any kind of reaction to this statement? I imagine the answer is probably no for the most part. And do we expect that we are going to get some kind of big reaction to this?
Well, I mean, they've actually denied it, but of course they are. I mean, what are they going to do? Admit that they've plotted to assassinate or target or harass people on Western soil? That would obviously put them on a direct collision course with Western countries. Deny, deny, deny is what they've always done, despite the fact that there's incontrovertible evidence in many cases to Iran's connection to a lot of these actions.
And of course, there's obviously, as I mentioned, a lot to discuss here. So how widespread would you say that these threats really are when you look at them? Because they listed a lot of different folks there, including journalists and other officials. We know that threats have been made against President Trump, not just once by Iran, but many times.
If I'm not mistaken, there's actually an individual in custody in the Southern District of New York for such a plot against President Trump. And my colleague, Behna Ben Taleblu, has actually written a piece on these assassination attempts or these assassination threats, if anyone's interested. But they're widespread in both time and space. Like I said, they go back to 1979, attacks on dissidents, either from direct Iranian agents or from affiliates that are affiliated with their terrorist groups. They've targeted a variety of people, the U.S. president, right? There are threats against Mike Pompeo and other former Trump administration officials from the first Trump administration. There are threats against Iranian dissidents, Iran international journalists in the UK, Masih Alinejad in New York. So they target a broad spread of people. These threats have continued over time, and geographically they're widespread. The United States, Western Europe, and in the Middle East. Look, if we look at countries like Lebanon, for example, there was a spate of assassinations against dissidents, politicians that were in opposition to Hezbollah and Iranian interests in the early 2000s, and that continued for some time. The latest person that is alleged to have been killed by Hezbollah, a Lebanese dissident, was named Luqman Saleem. If I'm not mistaken, he was killed in 2022. So again, from high officials to low officials to average people who just speak out against the regime, to journalists, this is how the Iranian regime operates. We can't expect them to operate any differently outside of their borders than they do against people within their borders. They just do it more subtly and try to create an element of plausible deniability. But thankfully, with this statement, the ground under their feet seems to be shrinking.
I do want to pop this up on your screen right here because we know that Ambassador Mike Huckabee, I mentioned this kind of off the top, he did go into Gaza today, and he says observed humanitarian food program by the U.S. that launched GHF. Hamas hates GHF because it gets food to people without it being looted by Hamas. Over 100 million meals served in 2 months. So again, Huckabee, as well as Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, are there in Gaza. How significant is a visit like that? Because we know that Gaza can be very dangerous, especially right now, especially when you're talking about Hamas.
Look, I mean, I think it's significant in that Ambassador Huckabee and Mr. Witkoff can go see the operations themselves and how they're proceeding, and the distribution mechanism to these hungry Palestinians who deserve this aid. In terms of danger, yes, Gaza is dangerous. I think these visits were announced ahead of time. I doubt Hamas would have targeted a U.S. ambassador or a U.S. envoy, especially one with whom they're negotiated or engaged in negotiations, at least deliberately. That would have put them on a severe collision course with the United States. And I think right now what they want is to leverage whatever they can with the U.S. administration to stop Israel's campaign in Gaza. That would work at cross ends with that purpose. There's always the risk of unintended consequences, right? Does a low-ranking Hamas member who doesn't know what Ambassador Huckabee or Mr. Witkoff look like attack them as they have attacked, GHS sites in the past? I think this also is meant to lend credence and legitimacy to GHF operations, right? These have come under severe criticism from aid groups, particularly those involved with the United Nations. And if we're being honest, look, the GHF, I think their heart is absolutely in the right place. I think they're trying to do the right thing. I think their mission of not being neutral, because a lot of these organizations have this principle of neutrality when it comes to aid distribution, not vis-a-vis Gazans. Obviously, they have to be neutral vis-a-vis Gazans, but vis-a-vis Hamas, where these aid organizations, the traditional aid organizations, in a misguided attempt to help the people of Gaza, end up cooperating with Hamas to some degree or another, just like the ICRC cooperates with Hamas to some degree or another, because they are the local authority. GHF, its mission is to exclude Hamas from that process, to delegitimize Hamas in the process of getting food to Gazans. At the same time, it's a new organization, and delivering humanitarian aid in a combat zone, an active combat zone, especially one like the Gaza Strip, is one of the most complicated missions possible. Add to that, you have an enemy, Hamas, that is embedded among the civilian population that has an interest, because of GHF's exclusion of the organization, in foiling these attempts. So GHF is working on a steep learning curve, and there have been mistakes, but their heart is absolutely in the right place. And I think what all these other aid organizations must do is, rather than condemn GHF, perhaps assist them and emulate them in excluding Hamas from the distribution process or from any part of the process of getting aid to civilians in Gaza.
And David, the last question I want to ask you is about a topic that, of course, you have been paying very close attention to. We know that just yesterday, or over the past several days, we have seen Israeli operations there against Hezbollah. Can you tell me if that ceasefire that exists is still intact, and the situation that is unfolding here between Israel and Hezbollah? Because so much focus has been on Gaza, but you also have the situation there with Hezbollah.
I mean, these Israeli operations have been going on since November 27th of 2024, virtually, right? Since the day the ceasefire was inked. And the reason for that, like, the ceasefire is technically still intact. but we have daily operations, near daily assassinations of Hezbollah officials. It's technically a failure in the sense that a proper ceasefire, a successful ceasefire, the letter of the ceasefire succeeding would have seen the Lebanese government do the job that the Israelis are doing right now, rolling up and dismantling and disarming the rest of Hezbollah's fighters, their infrastructure, conducting arrests if necessary, but doing what a sovereign nation is supposed to do, and that is to prevent the growth or the existence of a terrorist organization on its territory from threatening a sovereign state, a neighboring sovereign state like Israel. So that has not happened. And where we see Hezbollah today, we just had competing statements from President Joseph Aoun, who's the president of Lebanon since January, and Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General of Hezbollah. Qassem is saying we're not disarming. That's been Hezbollah's consistent line since November 27, 2024. Most recently, he said, any attempt to get us to surrender our arms is basically getting us to surrender our arms to Israel, and we're never going to do that. And he's framing this as an attempt to keep Lebanon strong. Of course, they're engaging in some kind of manipulation here. Meanwhile, President Aoun is saying, no, we want to monopolize arms in the hands of the state, and the army should be the only actor that carries arms, that defends Lebanon. He named Hezbollah by name for the first time publicly, and I think that was a very positive step. The problem is there have been no actual concrete measures beyond that to secure Hezbollah's disarmament. They're still in this idea of talking to each other. And this is what Hezbollah wants, because as long as this remains in bilateral talks or consensual talks, then Hezbollah will be able to dominate the conversation and say, we're not going to disarm. So until then, we're going to see a continuation of these Israeli strikes, because, again, while the ceasefire holds in theory, in practice, one side, Lebanon, is failing to enforce it, and that is causing the entire ceasefire to fail.
David Dowd there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to join us and talk everything Middle East. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.